Hello, good afternoon. Thank you all so much for coming in today. On behalf of Women's Board, in conjunction with Designer Showcase, we are pleased to welcome Pam Bennet. Pam is Associate Professor with The Ohio State University and serves as the State Master Gardener, Volunteer Program Director, and Horticulture Educator for OSU Extension in Clark County. That's a mouthful. Pam specializes in herbaceous ornamental plant trials and presents programs on annuals and perennials, as well as other landscape topics locally, statewide, and nationally. Pam has also lectured in South Korea, China, Greece, and Turkey. She's a Clark County Park District Commissioner and a board member of the Hartman Rock Garden. She's past president of the Friends of the Ohio Governor's Residence and Heritage Garden. Pam is the co-author of an award-winning book, Gardenpedia, an A to Z guide to gardening terms, writes a weekly gardening column for 8 counties receiving the Cox Publishing brands, authors the bi-monthly Ask the Expert column for Ohio Gardening Magazine, and is a frequent writer for popular gardening magazines as well as trade publications. Please help me welcome Pam Bennet.
Thank you, Tiffany. I appreciate that. And would you guys mind if I come down here? I like to move a lot, and being on a stage like that, well, you know, sometimes you get too close. Yeah, and you guys aren't close enough to catch me. So, well, thank you. I appreciate that. For the next hour, I'm going to sit here being an associate professor and share with you all kinds of word slides about the great plants that we're working with. Does that sound good? Word slides? Come on, you guys. I'm going to give you a feast for your eyes on annuals today, but I am going to give you a little bit of boring research type background just so you have an idea of how I came to this conclusion that some of these plants are the best plants to use. And I put this as these are not your grandma's annuals, because my interest in horticulture started way, way back when I'd go to my grandma's house and I'd help her deadhead the petunias. Remember that feel and that smell? If you've deadheaded petunias before, it's sticky and it just has that little smell. Well, I graduated from Ohio State, and of course I knew everything about horticulture, right? I started working at a local garden center, and we had petunias, we had annuals, all kinds of stuff. This was back in the early 80s. But we didn't have the petunias that we have today. We didn't have the annual plants that we have today. The research that's going on in annuals, perennials, trees, and shrubs is just incredible. The number of plants coming to market is incredible. However, it's exciting to see that many plants coming to market, but the problem is, for you guys, the consumers, what should I grow? What's good? What's easy? Wait a minute, how many petunias are there? So my research is focused on trying to narrow it down to some of the top performing plants based on my field trials. Now, the handout that you have, I am not going to cover every single plant on there today. But if there's a plant on that handout and you're curious about it or want to look it up, know that it has done well in our trials at some point in time. So I put all those on there kind of as a compilation over the years so that you'll know that these plants do really well in the garden. And I will tell you what I mean by doing really well. Doing really well is low maintenance. Perform, high performers, look beautiful, look fantastic all season, but you don't have to deadhead, you don't have to fertilize. Now, you will have to water some, but you don't have to be a slave to those plants. In our background, I am from Springfield, Ohio. We started the field trials in 1995, and our evaluation process is solely to find those plants that do really well in a landscape with very little input. We think about the consumers who really don't want to do much. We think about the commercial growers who don't want to spend a lot of time in a commercial business maintaining those flowers. So we try to look at those plants you can put them in, enjoy them thoroughly, but not have to work hard to have that. This was our old office site. I wanted to show you this because our plants are exposed to harsh conditions. We do not baby them. They get the worst conditions possible, full sun, unless I tell you. So if I say something's planted in the shade, I'll make note of that. But if I don't say anything, you can assume that it's been growing out in the sun, in full 100% sun. Wind, exposure to whatever elements we might have, these plants are pretty much on their own. We have big events. We have a large garden jubilee in August to share with everybody. But again, at the bottom, if you notice, these are the field trials. They're wide open, they're exposed, and what you see is what you get. We are also very fortunate now. We lost this site due to the commissioners selling our building. This was our demonstration garden And now we have been given the opportunity to build our gardens on a former golf course. They had to close the golf course. The Parks District had to close it because of financial constraints. So this is the entire golf course. We're going to develop 53 acres of this into the Snyder Park Gardens and Arboretum. As part of that development, this area right here will be our feature garden. We have had a local foundation help us fund the feature garden, and we have raised $200,000 to put in the pavilion this summer. So this is something new for Springfield. We're a small community, 60,000 population, something very new, but the purpose is research, teaching, and pure enjoyment, just getting outside and being able to enjoy the outdoors. How many of you have heard of All-American selections, All-American trial selections? So we are also the only trial ground in Ohio for All-American trials. Now there's two different options here. We're a trial ground, which means I'm one of the judges. I evaluate and I turn my data in to a certified professional accountant or public accountant every year. They take that information and send it back to the organization. There are also display gardens. Kingwood Garden Center, Kingwood Gardens, Franklin Park Conservatory. There are many display gardens throughout the state. They take the winners, the All-American Selection medal winners, and they plant them on display. We look at them, though, as to, again, what you see is what you get. How do they perform in the beds? So we are one of those trial grounds. Our gardens are open to the public. It's not very hard to get there, 45 minutes, 50 minutes, depending on how fast you drive, on 70 to Route 68 right there in the middle of town. It's a great sight to see. And we have additional gardens as well that are being developed. Again, these are in the shade. If I tell you specifically that a plant's in the shade, then you can take that to the bank. But if I don't say anything, know that it's grown in the sun. Our volunteers are very active. I have 125 Master Gardener volunteers who help with this process. They plant in the greenhouse. They just moved everything out last week to harden off, and next Tuesday, rain forbidden or rain willing, we're going to plant our trials for this year. And boy, if we could just string 5 or 6 days of really nice sunny weather together, wouldn't that be great? I would have told you back in 1980s, 90s, clear up to about the mid-90s, to cut your flowers back as soon as you got them home. So you buy this beautiful flat of annuals, and we used to be able to buy them, for $12.99 a flat? That kind of tells you how old I am. We'd buy a flat of annuals. We'd tell you, go home, and I want you to cut all those flowers off. And the husbands would look at me like, I just paid good money for this. Why are you telling me to cut those flowers off? Well, back then, we wanted those plants to really bush out, to break. Instead of getting really tall and lanky, we wanted them to start sending out some lateral branches and be nice and compact. And we wanted roots to develop first before the flowers really started taking over, because that's a lot of energy for those plants. Today's annuals, with many of the new vegetative varieties, you don't need to do this. Put them in the ground, and they will just start branching on their own. They will flower on their own, and they will become very established without this. We did some anecdotal trials just to kind of demonstrate and see if this is true. In the back, these are 2 different varieties of Cleome. We would cut these back, and the 3 in the front. We have 6 plants in each row. We didn't cut back. You cannot see any difference in blooming, in quality, maybe just a little bit of difference in height. But why cut them back if you don't have to? So that's one of the things that you'll find about today's vegetative varieties that you don't have to do like we used to. The other thing I want to tell you about in terms of the research part of it is I think we over-fertilize. I think we as gardeners, we as gardeners over-fertilize. Because we have clay soil, how many of you like clay soil? Yeah, nobody likes clay soil, right? It's terrible, it's compacted, it's even worse, poorly drained. Well, clay soil is good. Clay soil is actually good. Because it has good nutrient holding capacity, it holds on to the nutrients, which means our soils tend to have pretty good nutrients in terms of phosphorus and potassium. So we tend to not have to add a lot of additional nutrients other than maybe nitrogen, all right? Now, clay soil is good, but compacted, poorly drained clay soil is not good. I'll totally agree with you there. So we add that organic matter to improve the quality of the beds, to improve the air structure, the air and porosity, good root growth, good drainage. That's how we improve our heavy clay soils, adding that organic matter. We fertilize 1 time with a 14 slow release. You can get whatever you want, but it's a slow release fertilizer that lasts over the course of the season. And this, of course, is based on a soil test. And most gardeners don't do soil tests until when? When there's a problem. That's when we find most gardeners are going to do a soil test. Irrigate as needed. Now, yes, annuals will need more irrigation in the beginning stages to get them established. So if you're getting them planted this week or after Mother's Day weekend, water early on. If it's not wet, water early on to get them established. But if you treat them properly and prepare the soil right, you may not have to water as much during the course of the growing season. We water to keep them alive. We are not there to water, most recommendations for maximum plant growth, 1 inch of water or irrigation or precipitation per week. We don't do that. We just make sure they stay alive. Otherwise, we wouldn't have anything to evaluate. Here's one of the key components in our trials. We do not deadhead these plants. We let them go all season long. What you see right here was taken on the 1st of October without deadheading. So we did not come into these petunias and deadhead, pull off the old blooms. The genetics today, they're so vigorous that they just keep right on blooming. They don't set seeds and they just keep right on going. So many of these will go right up until a hard frost or a freeze. Now that may not be true for everything. There are still some varieties out there like marigolds, for instance. We have not really seen a top-notch variety that doesn't need deadheaded. This lady asked me a question about snapdragons. Are we going to talk about those today? They're not in this trial either. They do not do well in the heat of the summer. So therefore, if they're not deadheaded, they're not going to perform in the summer. They're great for spring and fall when it's cool, but they don't like our summer temperatures. So keep in mind, these plants and what I'm going to share with you today is based on the fact that these do well all season long. We don't use insecticides, fungicides, or mulch. Now, you've heard mulch is good. Mulch is good to hold moisture, keep the sun from beating on the soil, keep weeds down. Because it's research, imagine 25 to 30 volunteers trying to put down at least 2 inches of mulch in a perfect, even variable. It just doesn't work. So we say, okay, we're not going to do mulch. So we do hand weeding, and we do add a pre-emergent herbicide 6 weeks post-planting, which would be similar for you would be preen. 6 weeks post-planting, so read the label if you're going to use preen. That prevents weeds from coming up. We do an evaluation. On your handout, you have this address. You can go there and find pictures. You can go there and find previous results. This is a good opportunity to see how they do all season long, because keep in mind, some things start out really good. They may hit a down slump. Maybe it gets really hot or really dry or really cold and so forth. So this tells you what they do during the course of the season. We evaluate June, July, August, and September. Then we do an average final rating. So the stuff I'm sharing with you today, these are the top of the top. They've been great for over many years. They're new things in many cases. In fact, you probably won't like me when I finish this because some of these you may go out. There may be 1 or 2 still in here that are still being trialed and are not quite yet on the market. But I think we're at the point now where everything I have in here today should be available this year. Now, you may not find it everywhere. It may be restricted to certain garden centers, but it will be eventually on the market. And again, this is just an example of the planting during the summer course of the month, or the season. All right, are you ready? I'm going to talk faster to get through this in an hour, okay? If you have any questions for clarifying purposes, let me know, and then I'll also save time at the end. Plan on going till about 3 o'clock, but I'll save time at the end if you do have any additional gardening questions. Alternanthera is a foliage plant grown in full sun. This is one that came out several years called Little Ruby. However, if you can find Purple Prince, and this is on the market, I've seen it. In fact, I saw it at a couple garden centers the other day. Purple Prince is a foliage plant. Deep burgundy color. Excellent for containers and hanging baskets as a filler, falls down over the side. Also excellent as a nice mounded plant. Now, most of the time with annuals, you're going to hear me say mounded, rounded, rounded, 1.5 by a foot wide. Many of our annuals grow in that mounding habit, as opposed to think about some of the perennials where we have upright growth, we have arching growth. But most of the time with our annuals, you're going to find this kind of rounded, mounded habit. So that's what this does, about 4, 6, 8 inches in height. It is outstanding all summer long, but it does not like to be wet. So it's great for a really hot, dry situation. The new growth comes out a little bit lighter burgundy, and it fades to the darker burgundy. Fantastic when you pair it with whites, pinks, yellows, something else to really make that color pop. Here it's paired with a zinnia. I've got some yellow sweet potato vines, some pink petunias. It just really adds that nice accent. So again, containers, hanging baskets, and it could also be used as a bedding or border plant. Angelonia. Is anybody using Angelonia? You like it? It's a good plant. It's a really good plant. And what we found with it, it tends to do well in hot, dry, wet, cool. It's called summer snapdragon because it has that kind of characteristic of a snapdragon. It just blooms from the bottom of the stem up to the top and just keeps blooming all summer. Now you see all kinds of different names on there. You'll hear me say series, or you'll hear somebody at the garden center say this series. A series is a group of plants that have the same characteristics. So Angel Face is a 2-foot upright grower that grows kind of in a vase shape. Angel Mist is a little shorter. Serena is much shorter. So each of those series, they may have different colors in those series, but they have the same characteristics. So this is the Angel Face series, super pink, gets about 2 foot tall. They make excellent cut flowers for bouquets. They actually tend to last 10 days or a little bit longer. Summer Snapdragon, you can see what that looks like, but when we do some of the breeding and the hybridizing, sometimes we lose certain characteristics to gain other ones. So think about hybrid tomatoes, the ones you just are buying at the grocery store still, all right? The breeding has gotten to the point where those have great holding capacity. I had some set on my kitchen counter for 2 weeks about a month ago and stayed red, didn't rot or anything, because they've been bred to have that thick skin and holding power so that they could be shipped and, grown in the winter months and so forth. Your hybrid or your heirloom tomatoes, though, how long would they sit on your kitchen counter? Not very long. They're going to rot quickly, but they're fresh, thin skin, can bruise very easily, but not good for shipping. So there are some things we give up when it comes to breeding. In this case with Angelonia, we've got a great plant, but it is sterile. It is sterile. Even though it has that kind of tubular flower that hummingbirds like, they're not going to get any pollen from this. Now, you've heard pollinators are a big deal. Let's protect our pollinators. Native plants are very important. Everybody should be planting native plants, they say. I'm not going to judge anybody for not planting native plants and planting something like this and not having native plants for the pollinators. What I suggest is plant some of each. Plant something that the pollinators like, and if you really like this plant, go for it, plant it. Don't let people, say, oh, you got to have plants for pollinators everywhere you go. Have a nice mix. You can have a really nice mix. This is a beautiful plant to be used for other purposes, but then add some of the other plants that the pollinators like. So it is important to protect our pollinators, don't get me wrong. That's very important. But we also have great plants that are introduced to the market that also have great characteristics. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? This is Archangel Red, Cherry Red, another great color. They tend to come in the pinks and purples and whites. Now, not everything is perfect. Remember I mentioned that these are the best of the best. This is an ageranthemum. It is not a daisy, but it looks kind of like a daisy, or mum rather. This plant looks great. If you go out, you'll probably find it in a lot of the garden centers, a lot of the nurseries. Wonderful plant, looks beautiful in the spring, has this great flush of flowers. You buy it, you give it to Mom for Mother's Day, it's beautiful, and then all of a sudden when the heat goes up, it shuts down. Just like your snapdragon, your alyssum, it stops blooming. It still has decent foliage, but it's not, it doesn't give you that show. This series, Butterfly Series, this is quite the opposite of that. I have been very, very impressed. I would never probably recommend ageranthemum, except for when this series came out several years ago. If you can find the Butterfly Series, that's the name, and there's golden, white, and pure white. This was blooming clear up all summer long in the heat of the summer, clear through until September and October when it got a hard freeze. So the Butterfly Series is one of those ageranthemums that do quite well all season. The other ones listed there on your handout, they do have beautiful foliage, really nice lacy foliage. Some of them are kind of silvery. So it is worth having, but just know that if you don't deadhead the others, you're not going to have this color all season. And there's a picture in late October of last year. Another shot of another season. I mean, they just were powerful all summer long. So begonias. How many of you remember whiskey, vodka, and gin? And not the drinks, the begonias. Anybody remember those? Those go way back to the 80s, early 90s. Those were the old little tiny ones that were puny. They were nice. They had dark colored foliage or green foliage. They were pretty. But boy, I'm telling you, the begonias today are just absolutely off the hook. This is Surefire Red and Pink. This is Surefire Red and Pink in the full sun. They are extremely tolerant of full sun without scorching, without leaf burn. They just look spectacular. And Surefire gets about a foot, foot and a half tall. These are just incredible. Anybody who made that comment? Anybody make a comment? I heard somebody. These are fabulous. Has anybody grown Whopper Big Megawatts? Tough plants, 2 to 3 foot tall, sun or shade. Now keep in mind, This is growing in the shade. Notice the leaves are open, green, lush, dark colors, a little more area between the leaves. They're called the internode. These are grown in the sun. Notice the leaves are kind of a little lighter green. They're kind of folded up. They're conserving that hot sun space, but they still have the same amount of flowers. So they will grow. They'll have just a little different characteristic, but they will sure grow. This was a grouping of all of those in the sun several years ago. 2.5 to 3 foot tall, just vigorous. And so there's 6 there, there's 6 there, and there's 6 here. And they were about 2 foot tall and just full, just absolutely full. This was last year. This was really an oddity for us. We have never had problems with begonias and deer before. And we do have deer in our gardens. They're very common in our area. But it's a teaching garden, so we teach people what to use and how you can prevent any deer damage. But this was just a real oddity last year. This was in October, before we had a good frost. And I went out to check the gardens, and I look at this, and I'm like, what in the world is going on? And they were just picking the leaves. They just like the nice lush green leaves. You notice they left the stems. It was definitely deer because it was rather ragged. And it was just those 6 plants. It was just real odd to see that because I've never seen that before. But it was just, you know, you can get all those lists about deer-resistant plants, but when they're hungry, they're going to eat whatever they can get a hold of. So apparently at that time, they were really hungry. Calibrachoa. It is not a petunia. It is actually a different genus. I've seen them Home Depot, Walmart, Lowe's, all the different stores, all the different garden centers. They're beautiful plants, but they do not tolerate our clay soils or our pH. And if you don't know when you purchase these and you put them in the ground, this is what they're going to look like by July. If you add water to that and keep the soils wet, they're going to look even worse. These are very susceptible and sensitive to pH issues. So we have usually our clay soils are a little higher in pH, 7, 7.4. They like a 6.5 or lower pH. So if you're going to grow Calibrachoa, grow them in containers. This is one plant right here. They're fantastic for containers. Our trials would look like this for years and years until we finally said, wait a minute, is there something else we can do? And the breeders would say, let's put them in containers. So now we trial all of our Calibrachoa in containers, and they do wonderfully because they are very sensitive to pH. The soilless mix that we use in containers, it's much easier to control that pH than it is our clay soil. So don't put them in the ground. Now, again, all these different Calibrachoas, there's all these different varieties out there. Seeing trials is one way for you to kind of compare. You can go to OSU campus to Hallett Hall, where the gardens are, Chadwick Arboretum, and they do Calibrachoa trials in containers behind Hallett Hall, right by the greenhouses. You can go there anytime and look at these during the summer months. Different colors. I love all the names that they give these plants. Over Easy, Double Ruby. This was a popular one last year called Holy Cow. There's a double one, Super Bells, and I can't remember the name of it, but it's a double that looks like this. Just really pretty, tiny little flowers, but they're much more suited for hanging baskets and containers. Celosias. I have seen such incredible strides with celosias that I'm quite shocked. You know, with our flame or our feather-type celosias, our coxcomb-type celosias, they've always had to be deadheaded. Up until these last few years, well, this has been out about 10 years now, they've come up with varieties that don't require deadheading. And you can see the soil, the cracks in the soil. This was late August. This was not deadheaded. It looked like this all season long. So I was very impressed with this. It's called First Flame series. There's First Flame Yellow. Another one that is absolutely outstanding, I think we're going to have it in our trials again this year, called Arabona Red. The plumes on that are as big as my fist. They're just huge. And when you put a mass of these together, they really make a nice impact in terms of great landscape color. And there's a close-up shot of the Arabona Red. Anybody using Senorita Rosalita Cleome? Not your species Cleome, but this particular one. Anybody tried this one? This is a great plant because most of our old Cleomes end up looking like this at the end of the season or even in the middle of the season. They lose all their foliage. They've got bare knees. You only see these nice flowers on top. Architecturally, they could add some structure to a container and look nice. But we like to see the ones in the back where they have all that foliage all season long, so you see the height of it. 2.5 to 3 feet tall by about 3.5 feet wide. They are big plants. Now, with many of these vegetative cuttings, you will also likely pay more. You might pay $4.99 for a 4-inch pot or $5.99 depending on your market. But they're going to have much better genetics, much better vigor. They're going to grow faster. They're going to get bigger. They're going to give you more with less input in terms of what you have to do. Petunia rosalita on the right, Petunia, this is Blanca, this is Cleome Senorita rosalita. Again, the only downside is they are sterile. They were bred to be sterile because many of our Cleome, the species Cleome, reseed prolifically, and if you have a cottage garden or a Victorian garden, that's great. But many landscape contractors, they don't necessarily want all those little seeds coming up everywhere because that would be considered a weed if they change out that planting. So they've gone with some of these that are sterile. The bees still come after them, the butterflies, hummingbirds still look for the pollen, but they are sterile, so they're not going to reseed. So again, you trade off, you get this great foliage, great look all season, but you do lose that pollen. I'm not going to go in detail on coleus. You've got a lot in your handout there. Coleus are sun or shade. Today's varieties are much more vigorous in the sun. I've seen much better color in the sun. The older varieties we used to have would kind of fade when you get in the full sun. This is one called Henna. Nice undershot there of the burgundy underneath of the foliage. Redhead. When you're designing or using coleus, they do need something to go with them. They need something to offset or make the colors pop, because if they're all against a green background and they're red, they blend in. So they need a lighter color. They need something to make those colors stand out. The other message with coleus is make sure you know how big they get, because some coleus can get quite large, 2.5, 3 feet tall by 3 feet, 4 feet wide. Some are very small, 1.5 by 1.5 feet. So know how big they get. This is one that was in our gardens last year. This was in the shade, but we also grow them in the sun to see how well they do. And look at these things. Those are all coleus back there. And one of my Master Gardener volunteers made a great comment last year as we were evaluating. She said, you know, I really appreciate seeing these in trials because most of the coleus I've grown are real small, you know, 1.5 feet, but if I'd put one of these in my small city landscape, it would just overwhelm everything. So know the size, know how big they get, know what their growth habits. We had one last year also called Strawberry Drop and Chocolate Drop. They're a ground cover, they're a low grower, they're a hanging basket hanging over the side type plant. So when you're going to buy coleus, look at that label, find out how big they get, and then like I said, they could go sun or shade. Is anybody growing cypress? King Tut, Baby Tut, Prince Tut? These are fun plants. These are really fun plants. So these are water-loving plants. If you give them lots of water, they'll get, King Tut will get 6 foot tall, Baby Tut gets 3 foot tall. If you don't give them a lot of water, King Tut will be about 3 foot tall, Baby Tut will be about 1 foot tall. So they really like water. So more watering, the bigger they're going to get. They're excellent accent plants or feature plants. They're beautiful in large containers. This container is about 4.5 foot tall. And then you add the King Tut to that, it just gives you such nice impact, such architectural structure for the landscape. This is a Indianapolis Museum of Art. Against that gray wall with the red and the orange and the yellow, just a great architecture, great structure to add to the garden. So you don't need a lot of them, but they do add a lot to the garden. This is Baby Tut in a container, nice lacy kind of frilly texture. And then a few years back, you know, King Tut kind of got big. So not everybody can grow King Tut because of the height. So then they put out Prince Tut. And Prince Tut's about 1.5 foot to 2 foot tall. Same habits, same characteristics as King Tut, but a little more well-behaved in a smaller container or a smaller basket for the landscape. Euphorbias, anybody grow these or seen these before? Yeah, these are so easy to grow. They're simple. There's lots of them. This is one called Diamond Frost. Diamond Frost has done well in the sun, has done well in wet, dry. It doesn't matter the season. It does quite well. It grows just about anywhere. This is one I really like called Diamond Delight. And you can kind of tell the difference between them. Diamond Delight is a little more compact, many more flowers in terms of the plant. About 1.5 feet wide by about 6 to 8 inches in height. This is Diamond Delight in the shade. We tried some of these plants in the shade just to see how they do. And I encourage people, you know, don't plant thousands of petunias in the sun, or in the shade rather, because it says they like sun, but try one or two. These plants are supposed to prefer full hot sun, but that is in full bloom in the middle of August in shade and doing quite well. So try some of these. Again, the genetics are so much different than what we used to have. Here's the challenge for people who go to these garden centers and look at these plants and they look at all these different names. Which one should I get? They all have to be different. They all have to have genetic differences in order to be named appropriately. But it is hard to tell what the difference is between many of them. And again, that's why I encourage people to utilize trials, because trials will kind of give you an idea of how they perform against each other. This one came out last year, and this one was bred by proven winners to compete with other plants. So Diamond Delight, Diamond Frost, all the early ones, if you put them in a container, they just kind of meander. They never look like a nice, full, solid mass of white. They just kind of grow in and through among containers. They don't compete well in a pot with other roots. So proven winners came up with this one. This is Diamond Delight. This is Diamond Mountain, and it was bred for vigor. They liked the way it was performing in terms of its vigor. It is extremely vigorous. I mean, it was about 1.5 feet early in the season. By the time it got into August, it was probably around 3 foot, 3.5 foot tall. But very vigorous, gives you that white color. And when you're designing flower beds or containers, white always makes everything else pop. So always have some white in your garden, in your container, and it really makes it stand out. This was Diamond Mountain, because before, if you would have used Diamond Delight, you wouldn't even see Diamond Delight among these coleus. But right now, because of its vigor, it's doing quite well. So I think it has a lot of promise for really blending in well with other plants instead of being crowded out. Glamour was another one that did quite well in containers. Here's a good example. They don't get exactly really full, but they will fill in and add color. Kind of almost reminds you of a little bit of baby's breath if you add that mixed to a nice flower arrangement. I love this plant. Has anybody ever grown Evolvulus? It is an old plant. It's been around forever. But the Blew My Mind series, this is a low-growing ground cover. You know, as far as a bedding plant, it's not probably the best thing for a bedding plant. It's good, but a container, it's fantastic. The nice cornflower blue flowers just keep blooming right on up the stem. Great for full sun. You won't get as much. This is in the shade with blue juncus grass in a blue container, just a nice, really monochromatic color scheme. Not as many flowers in the shade, but it still has that nice color to it. And then here it is with your oranges, your hot colors. So it's a really, probably, next to Salvia Victoria Blue, probably one of the best true blue colors that I've seen in annuals. Gomphrena. If you've been growing plants for a long time, you'll remember the old purple globe and strawberry fields, the old amaranth years ago, little tiny flowers that you could cut. People would make tussy mussies or dry them and so forth. Great flowers for containers and to use in the house. Gomphrena kind of sat for a long time until about probably 5 years ago. They started breeding, and boy, there are some really cool varieties. This one's called Fireworks, and this one can get big. This was at Franklin Park Conservatory several years ago, 2.5 to 3 foot with just loads of color, lots of color. And the other thing about a plant like this is it moves in the wind. So therefore, now you're adding another architectural angle, another feature to your garden, that movement in the garden. And it's a pollinator magnet. The pollinators love this plant. So it serves a lot of purposes, and it's also quite beautiful. And if you want to cut and dry some of the flowers or use them in containers, you can do that as well. Again, another one that came out last year that should be on the market this year, I'm pretty sure they said it was going to be available, is this Truffula Pink. And again, just like the purple, beautiful pink flowers. Pollinators just love these plants. They just, I mean, in the summer, we can always tell which plants like the pollinators like, because they're almost moving. You stand there and you can just see these plants moving. And this was another one as well that really does quite well. So, you know, I told you that the Diamond Mountain euphorbia is really, really vigorous. Well, Gomphrena is usually very vigorous as well. So I put the combination together thinking, now these might look good together. I actually had to cut the White Mountain back several times just to let the Gomphrena get up high enough to get some sun and start growing. The Diamond Mountain is big. So this is an example of the Truffula Pink with the euphorbia. If you don't see this one and you like it, ask for it. You don't see it too much at garden centers. They don't carry it very often, but I have seen it in displays, and it looks spectacular. This is a hibiscus that is not hardy. I don't care what you try to do, and I've tried everything to get it to overwinter. It will not overwinter. It does not bloom either. It is known for its foliage, so it has that really nice maple leaf-like foliage. It's a big plant. That's one plant. It's 4 foot tall by about 4.5 foot wide, so it is very, very vigorous. Needs other things to go with it, like the pink petunias, white petunias. It needs something else to go with it, so it's a good back of the border plant. Be great to fill in a perennial garden if you have a gap there where you want a little bit of dark color, but a really great plant to use. Then they came out with Little Zen, because again, not everybody can grow mahogany splendor because of the height. Little Zen is about 1 foot by 1 foot. Just nice little rounded. They could be massed together. They could be used as fillers in containers, but they just have a real nice structure to them. Hypoestes, the polka dot plant. Anybody have this in their house as a house plant? This is a really common old-fashioned house plant that they're doing a little bit more with right now, and we have been extremely impressed with it the last few years it's been in the trials. This is out in full hot sun. It has that pink and green polka dot leaf, the white in the back. Again, great filler, great foliage plant, no flowers to it, about a foot, foot and a half in height. And this is it in the shade. Now notice it's a little taller in the shade, not quite as compact and as dense, but what a great filler for a container, especially this one because it adds that white, but it's variegated green and white, so really good color. I expect we'll see more of that on the market in the next several years because it just did gangbusters for us. Now, impatiens. Many of you may have heard of the impatiens downy mildew problem several years ago. We think we've done a pretty good job of eliminating it. We haven't seen it over winter in Ohio. Growers are now starting to come back and planting impatiens again. So our recommendation is, don't hesitate to plant them. Just don't go full out all, lots of them until you're pretty confident that, the downy mildew is under control. Growers are all spraying for this to prevent it in the greenhouse. Not that they're getting it, they're just being preventative on it. There is a brand new impatient out by one of the seed companies, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's supposed to be downy mildew resistant. So we'll watch for that to come to market in the next few years. There's not enough up to make it out right now, but it's supposed to be resistant. And that'll be kind of the way I think people are going to be going with impatiens anyways. My message to you is don't plant the same plant in the same spot every single year. That's where you get disease and insect problems to build up. If they have that same host plant, then yeah, they're going to be happy. They're going to thrive. You keep putting the food back in that area, they're going to keep growing. Take the food away, they starve, and you won't have that issue. That's why that's why we rotate crops, so we don't have that issue of pest problems. So don't plant them in the same spot every year. Try something different. Now, your hybrids, your sun patients and your New Guineas, they are not the same species. They are not susceptible to downy mildew. So if you're still concerned about it, you can go with these sun patients, which are hybrids, or the New Guineas. When I was first starting in the garden center in probably, I started 81, so about 82 or 83, all the growers were saying, hey, we've got this impatient that really does well in full sun. You're going to love it. So they put these New Guineas out on the market, and we all started planting them in full sun. Do they perform in full sun? Absolutely not. They look horrible in full sun. They'll grow in full sun, but they will not thrive. They need an afternoon shade, maybe take an early morning sun, but they do not take full hot all-day sun unless you plan on watering them about 4 times a day. If you water them, they'll do great in sun, but you got to keep up with it. So, plant them where they get like that early morning sun. In this case, they do get irrigated. They're on campus in the trials. They're out in full hot sun, but they get irrigated on a regular basis, not by hand either, by a system that's turned on by remote control. So they do have additional water. Sweet potato vine. Love sweet potato vines. They're vigorous. They grow just about anywhere. They do quite well in full sun. They also do some decent growth in the shade. But the problem is there's just so many of them. This is just a few of them, the Blackberry series, the Chillin series, the Desana, the Illusion, and then more and more. There's just a bunch of them. They're all for their foliage. I've never seen one that has a decent bloom that's really, something to shout about. They all have different shapes of foliage, different colors of foliage, different textures. But they are all very vigorous and big and bold. 10 to 12 foot in a year would be easy for one of these plants to grow. You can't eat the sweet potatoes. They will look ugly. They're really big and ugly, and if you ever emptied like a basket or a container and you pull them out and look at them, they're not very pretty, but they are edible. If you cut them up, chop them up, you can eat them. And they're also bullies in containers, so if you don't put them in the right size container, they'll take over. They'll be the only thing available. These were our trials about 2 or 3 years ago, and I told you we had deer problem. You can see there's little footprints here. For some reason, and this is purely anecdotal, there is no research behind this, but for some reason they loved these yellows. You can see where they chew, they just, they don't have, let's see, they have bottom teeth, no upper teeth, or vice versa. They just kind of tear things up. You can see where they've chewed, and for whatever reason, I think it was just to annoy my program assistant, they'd pull this one out every night. She'd go out there, and every morning it's laying there wilted. It was that one every single day. So finally we said, okay, we got to do something, or we're not going to have any sweet potato plants. And remember, I said we don't normally use pesticides. We will break down and use pesticides if it's absolutely necessary so that we could keep something in the trial. So they weren't bothering these, they were bothering these. In fact, they'd come in, so there's a row here and a row here. They'd come in at the end of this row, and they would just kind of walk right down in the middle. And I need somebody to Photoshop a picture with a deer in a shopping cart, because it was like they were going like this. They wouldn't step on the plants. They just, what do I like? What am I going to eat? And this is the one they probably liked the most of that year. So we broke down. You can see this one. Finally, we got it established to the point, but that was after we took action. We used a product called Plant Skid, and at this point in time, I would probably say this is one of the best products to use for deer control. It's a vial product. It's 98% dried blood. The liquid, as you can see, is not very attractive, but we used it. Now, it will tell you on the label, try it first on a little tiny leaf, or a leaf, to see if it's going to cause damage, because, it may burn the plant, it may cause damage. So don't go out and wholesale spray all your plants until you try it to see if it's going to be all right to use. So we tried it, and we found out it was very much, very safe for the plants. It didn't bother them. We got 3 weeks of control out of it. And usually with your products, your repellents, things like that, you don't get that much control. So we got 3 weeks with the liquid, plus we took action. We also did a perimeter of the powder, the granular, around the outside of the bed of sweet potatoes, and then around the outside of the big bed, which is a 100 by 100 square foot bed, with another application of granules. So we were definitely going to get those guys. And it worked. It worked quite well. Plant Skid, S-K-Y-D-D. It's not cheap. It's a little more expensive, but after 3 weeks, we made a reapplication. We got great plants all season. You can see I did the spray, and my hands used what's the kind of gloves, Joanne, that are safe to use, pesticide safe? The neoprene. Use something that's like that, because I had plastic on, and my hands still, it seeped through. My hands smelled like this. I was using vinegar and lemon and citric acid, anything I could find to get that smell off. Because it is 98% dried blood, but it works fantastic. And this is what happened then. That is that exact same bed after using that. So if we hadn't have done that, and like I said, we only break down and use pesticides if we're risking losing something. The other plant would be the other pest would be Japanese beetles, which we will put on our cannas because they love our cannas. Another problem we have with sweet potato vine, and this is not slugs. When people see holes in leaves, they tend to think, oh, these are slugs. These are not slugs. This is an insect called the golden tortoise beetle. It stays in containers over the winter, comes out of the ground, feeds on the leaf at night underneath the surface, and goes back down in. So you think it might be slugs because you don't see it. But anything you put in there for slug control is not going to bother it. It is a beetle. So if you're going to spray it, you need to spray underneath the leaf surface, and also use a product that is safe for annual plants and will control beetles. And it just chews holes in the leaves. You don't usually see it as much on the darker foliage because there's not that contrast between the light foliage or the dark foliage and the bottom leaves, but on the lighter foliage we see it. If you have a container or hanging basket, don't reuse the same soil. Get new potting soil the next year and try to prevent it from overwintering. Lots of great lantanas on the market. And with lantanas, my message, I'm not going to go through all of them, but my message is know the size. Some of these lantanas can be huge, some can be short, small growing ground covers. They all are extremely attractive to pollinators. Now, lantanas like it hot and dry, and I do mean hot and dry. This was 2 years ago when we had that July where we had considerable amount of rain and it got cool. They just stopped blooming. They still looked good. The plants looked nice, but they stop blooming if it gets wet and damp and cooler. So you have to have that hot, dry temperature for lantanas to survive. Now, this is same as old sweet alyssum. This is called lobulary. That's the genus name. All these new names, too, make it hard for gardeners. It's confusing. But this is alyssum that bloomed all summer throughout the entire season, no time of shutdown during the summer, and looked fantastic. It was bred for its heat tolerance. Dallas, Texas, 104 degrees in the middle of July. It was blooming just like this. Most of our sweet alyssum, is like snapdragon. Cool season, but in the summer it looks terrible. This one goes all summer long. There's all different cultivars of it, Frosty Night, Blushing Princess. But it is sterile. It will not reseed. It is not attractive pollinators, and it does not yet have that fragrance that we like with that sweet alyssum. It's real sweet, real fragrant. But I think they're working on it. Some people will say it does have fragrance, but I have never, even down on my hands and knees, laying my face in it, I have never really got that sweet sniff of that sweet alyssum. I love ornamental peppers. I love ornamental peppers. The problem is you are not going to go into the garden center and buy an ornamental pepper in the spring because it doesn't really give you much interest. It looks like a pepper plant. The only ones would be some of these that have the darker foliage. You might put money into those because, hey, that might be a good, interesting bedding plant. This is black pearl that came out several years ago. It's seed grown. There's your new peppers. After the purple flowers, the peppers, and this is what you get in the summer. So July and August is when you really start to see that beauty, that nice color on ornamental peppers. So if you're going to buy them, you need to either A, be looking for them at the garden center, or B, ask your garden center if they are going to carry them or can carry them, or buy seeds, throw some in the ground, and grow them from seed. Because garden centers really struggle trying to sell. I mean, think about it. Who's going to go in and, we sell visually, and who's going to go in and buy peppers unless they need them for their vegetable garden? These are some of them, and when we're evaluating ornamental peppers, we're looking at those that have peppers that are above the plant, that show good color and look good all season long. And these are some of them: Medusa, Explosive Ember, Explosive Ignite. The ones that are variegated with purple foliage as well, they're a little more interesting. They're a little easier to sell during the summer. Black Olive, Black Pearl. This is one of my favorites, and you will probably not ever see it at a garden center, but you can buy it from seed, and it's easy to start. Numex Twilight's about 2.5 foot wide by only maybe about a foot in height, but it gives you these just little tiny Christmas light peppers from July clear on into a hard frost. And yes, you can eat them, and yes, they are very hot. This is another one that they came out with last year called Onyx Red. We had a group in from the Ukraine, and this woman was there, and she said, "Oh, I love peppers." So we had several different varieties, and she was trying them, and there was one that she couldn't tolerate. And she could eat this one without any problem. She really had a taste for really hot stuff, but I'm telling you, this one she could not eat at all. But they are hot. Again, not everything does all that well. This is an oxalis, which is a really cool plant for containers or hanging baskets because it has that nice light chartreuse color. It's not really known for its flowers. This is about all you're going to get with flowers, but it's got the outline of red around the outside of the foliage, and it looks like a little clover. So it's really good for a container. So I took some home and planted them in the ground, and I just, was like, really? This is what it looks like in the ground? Container, yeah, but not in the ground. And every time I looked at this, I could only think of this. That image just reminded me of this. And if you're familiar, this is dog vomit fungus, the fungus that starts to grow on mulch as it starts to decay. Not a bad thing, if you have a dog, you know why it's called dog vomit fungus. But you just rake it up. It's just seasonal, it depends on the weather conditions. But this plant just really never made it as a popular bedding plant. But again, it's on the list because it's a great plant for containers. Really nice foliage color. Annual grasses, Pennisetum, Cetaceum. This is fireworks. These are annuals. They will not come back. They will not look good after you get a frost. They shatter. The flower heads shatter. They don't look good at all, but they are zone 7, 8 plants, so they make a great annual accent. So this is fireworks at the course of the summer. By the end of the summer, it's about 4.5 foot with beautiful flowers. Skyrocket, annual, nice, upright, arching habit to it with flowers. Vertigo on the left, skyrocket on the right. Vertigo starts out like this, but by July it looks like this. 4 foot, 4.5 foot tall by 4 foot wide, one plant, no flowers. This is really known for its foliage. So it has beautiful, broad, about an inch wide leaf foliage. Petunias, the 55-mile-an-hour plant, the one you can put way back in the back, and everybody's going to see it because they give you so much color. Again, this is a late season picture with no deadheading. Again, the problem is, look how many varieties, and it depends on what your garden center or your grower wants to grow as to what they're going to carry. So many times if you see something you like, you might have to ask them, hey, are you carrying this, or have you grown this before? This is just a teeny tiny portion of all the different petunias that are on the market. So again, trials are really important for people to see how they grow in the ground side by side to see what their habits are. So if you're going to select a petunia, make sure you know what you're using it for. Is it a container? Is it a massive bedding plant that you want to fill in? Do you want it nice and rounded, nice little mound where you put them all together? It just depends on what you're going to do with it. This is the Sherfinia. There's Supertunias. Nice close-up shot. Now, this is Supertunia, a petunia in 70% shade. You're not impressed. You should be impressed. You should be really impressed. Petunias don't grow in shade, right? Well, all of our bedding plants will grow in shade. All of our bedding plants will take shade, even though it says full sun. They just won't bloom as nicely. And that's kind of the reason why we say for best growth, put it in full sun. But again, we tried this in shade, and I'll tell you what, that's pretty impressive in 70% shade. So again, try one or two, especially if you have a shade garden and you're sick and tired of growing the same thing every year to give you some color. Try it. Even if you get half of what you have in terms of color, it's a bright color for the shade, and it really brings things out. Vista Silverberry, very popular because it has the red pinkish veination. Hanging baskets, containers, there's all different ways these plants grow. Color Rush came out. Color Rush is a little more compact. You can see it's a little more well-behaved, a little more rounded. Color Rush Blue, Color Rush Black Cherry, Supertunia Black Cherry. Now, the cherries, the reds, aren't usually as vigorous as the purples, pinks, and whites. They just don't have as much vigor. Again, Sangria, Watermelon, all the different ones that are available. Burgundy Velvet Wave. So know what you want. Know what you're going to use it for before you purchase that variety, and do a little research. The next petunias are what I call boutique petunias. They don't have the vigor. When I say vigor, they don't have the growth habit and the flower power that some of these others do, but they're extremely pretty. This is the first one that came out many years ago called Pretty Much Picasso. And it's pretty, it looks good, but you wouldn't put it 55 miles or, far out in the back and expect people to see it going by 55 miles an hour. You're just not going to see the color impact from it. But look at that up close. So put this on the patio. Put this where people are going to see it, in a hanging basket, a container, a walkway where people are going to actually be able to appreciate that color up close. Picasso in pink, two side by side. Again, just not like the pink and the Supertunias that you see. Then they came out with Picasso in purple. And I kept looking at this. I'm like, well, this looks like Pretty Much Picasso. What's going on here? And so we put them side by side, and I thought, okay, did somebody mislabel this? There's got to be a problem because they look identical. Well, if you look at these closely, what's the difference? Can anybody tell the difference? The sides, what do you mean? The border? Okay, everybody's mumbling. The what? The tips. Yeah, the tips, the edges. So if you look at this one, the green is all the way around. If you look at this one, it's just like it's been dipped in green paint. And again, as I said earlier, they have to be different. They can't be the same and call it a different name. They have to be genetically different. So they had this one growing, and all of a sudden somebody said, out of all these thousands of plants, hey, look at this. This is different than all the other ones. It has different genetics in it. So they took that, they made cuttings, and then they eventually grew it into enough that they could sell it as Pretty Much Picasso, and you can see the difference there close up. Isn't horticulture cool? Got so many good things. Black Velvet Phantom Pinstripe. I mean, again, you're not going to put them out in a bed, but look at them close up, how beautiful. Vintage Rose. Now the salvias. So these are absolutely superb for pollinators. Bumblebees, honeybees, hummingbirds love these. And there's all different kinds now available, and it's kind of exciting because there's some really cool ones that have come out recently. This is one called Playing the Blues. There it is early in June. There it is late in the season. So a cottage garden is kind of a free-form type, up to the top of the flower to be about 3 foot in height, and it just keeps blooming all season. And oh, don't forget, none of these have been deadheaded. So you don't have to do anything like that during the season. I love black and blue, black and bloom, all of these where the calyx, the part of the flower that's called the calyx, is this black. So as that grows up the stem, as that opens up, it sends out this purplish tubular flower. Hummingbirds go nuts for these. I always have to put these out by my back door so I have the hummingbirds coming up to the patio. Black and bloom, another one, 3.5 foot tall. They're good size and 3 foot wide, so give them plenty of space. I learned several years ago, I did not know this myself, but bumblebees, because their butts are so big, can't get in that little tube to get the pollen and steal the nectar and the pollen. So they actually drill a little tiny hole in the side of the calyx, stick their tongues in, lap out the pollen and the nectar, and leave that little tiny hole. So you see right here and here, little mark there. Doesn't hurt the plant at all. Doesn't hurt the flower. It continues to bloom, but it's just really cool to watch them working those flowers and drilling in through the side. Deep purple, another one, rockin'. Deep purple, this one was out on the market last year. This is early in the season, and this is later in the season. This year, rockin' deep fuchsia will be on the market. When it first came out, I kind of looked at it like, it's okay. But when you look at it, the sepals are kind of a brownish color with kind of a mauve fuchsia flower. So again, it's really cool, and you can see the heights of them, good color. But in terms of pollinators and hummingbirds and butterflies and bees, they're just super plants. And there's the close-up. See the kind of brown? It took me a little while to get used to them, but then I fell in love with them, and now I will not do without them. There's a close-up shot. Scaviola. This is another one called the fan flower or wind flower, or scaviola is the fan flower. This is one that I liked. We always had trouble with it. The rabbits would walk around the petunias to get to this. They love petunias, but man, they love this. This is like their favorite. So we would put chicken wire up around these until about mid-July. Once they got established and hardened off, the rabbits wouldn't bother. They just like the tender stuff. Your bulbs and stuff that are coming up now that are nice and tender, they love that stuff. But it's called fan flower because you can see how it has that nice little fan-shaped flower. I liked it. It wasn't my favorite until I saw it last year at Cedar Point in this bed with impatiens, and I was just totally blown away with it because of that texture. That texture just caught my eye. Just looking at that together, all the plants in there, I changed my total thinking about fan flower or scaviola. And I'll deal with the rabbits, but I just really like this, the way they used it with the New Guinea impatiens here. Just the texture. Does anybody else think that's cool? Yeah, it is. It is. Please validate my opinion. I just thought it was really cool in a bed before. And again, a hanging basket or container, it's great because 1 or 2 plants are, perfect. Tamaris are hot, dry, loving plants also. They're the same as verbenas. Tamaris and tapiens are all in the verbena group. Tamaris grow up the stem and bloom up the stem, whereas tapiens grow outwardly more in a container or vine type. There are several different cultivars. This one's called Enduroscape. This is one season, and I'll wrap it up here shortly because I know a few of you had to leave. This is early in the season when it was hot and dry. This is one called Cherry Burst. This was last year when we got into that wet August. We got a period of wet, cool nights, and this is what happened. They thrive on hot and dry. So don't water them on a regular basis. Put them in a container. Put them in a bed where you abuse it, and let it go. Hot, dry is much better. Great, great pollinator plants. Fantastic for the butterflies. Again, another one that in the summer when we walk up to this plant is just going to be moving with all kinds of pollinators. Vincas. Vincas are one of the best annuals to use for minimal maintenance and minimal problems. I've never seen insect, disease, pest problems on this, but the downside to it is we plant them too early and they end up looking yellow, yellowish green, and getting phytophthora root rot and dying. The biggest issue with Vincas is they do not like cool, damp soils. We have never had challenges with Vinca because we plant ours later in the season. If you plant it right now in early May and it stays wet and it stays cool the rest of May, they're likely to get phytophthora root rot and just turn yellow and just drop. We had that one time, remember a few years back when we had like 30 straight days of rain in June and it was cool? We had phytophthora root rot out of all the years since 1998 or whenever we started these, the only year we had trouble with Vinca, and that was because of the weather condition. And it is very, very related, straight related to weather. So plant it later in the season. Don't mulch it right away if you want to plant it Mother's Day weekend. Don't mulch it. Don't keep the soil cold. If it stays wet, that's what's going to happen. So they're just superior plants in terms of their performance. If you get past that season, they do fantastic. Containers, hanging baskets, you can plant earlier because the soil warms up earlier. But if it's in the ground, you might experience phytophthora or root rot. There's a little bit in the shade just to kind of give you some examples. Cora Cascade, so there's the rounded, mounded 1 foot by 1 foot, and then there's the Mediterranean Cascade that are more for hanging baskets and containers, as you see here. Finishing up with the zinnias, so we have 2 different types of zinnias that are pretty much the common ones now. We have the Profusion and the Zahara. Profusion have smaller flowers, lots of them. Zahara has larger flowers, but not as many. They both have almost identical characteristics in terms of growth, a foot by a foot. They both are excellent for pollinators. Neither one of them need deadheading. This is, again, going all season without deadheading. Neither one of them require the deadheading. They don't get powdery mildew like some of the older varieties, State Fair, Cut and Come Again, the ones that we used to use for shows. They're very compact, nice, easy to maintain plants for flower beds and borders. They could be used in a container as well, but they're going to get at least a foot in width. This is Zahara Sunburst. Uptown Grape's another one. I really like this one. It performed really well. It lasted all summer long. A little bit taller, about 1.5 feet, 2 foot tall, with these nice dark purplish maroon blooms. This is the site. Again, it's on the bottom of your handout there. This is the website if you want to find out more information specifically about trials. And in addition, this is the All-American site if you want to find out more and learn more about the All-American selections. With that, I appreciate your time. Hope you enjoy the spring. Happy Mother's Day to all, and hope you get all the plants that you want for Mother's Day. Thank you all.